Are we on? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Bonsoir, mesdames et messieurs. Welcome to our Friends of the Library annual Shakespeare Lecture. Je m'appelle Anne Vroom, as I think most of you know, and I am very, very pleased to see so many of you here this evening. The Shakespeare Lecture was established in 1992, a fair time ago, one of the 3 public lectures that we're so very pleased to offer to you, our friends, and the general public. We're very proud to present this lecture each year in partnership with the Stratford Festival in Ontario. It's interesting to note that McGill is the guardian of a vast and important material on Shakespeare through the Humanities and Social Sciences Library and our rare books and special collections. In addition, the library has an endowment that funds and supports library acquisitions to Shakespeare studies. Another endowment through the Department of English allows and supports student travel to Stratford. Our Dean of Libraries, Colleen Cook, will show and tell more about these special jewels at the end of the lecture this evening. As chair of the Friends of the Library, I'm pleased to report that our library's Fiat Lux project is progressing very well. This campaign to reimagine the McLennan Redpath Library for the 21st century is progressing, and it is one that will expand the McLennan Redpath Library to meet the evolving technological, pedagogical, and research needs of our library into the 21st century. It features prominently in McGill's recently launched $2 billion capital campaign, and we will tie in well with McGill's upcoming sesquicentennial in 2021. We hope that all of you, as lovers of the library, will want to support this extremely exciting project. Ce soir, nous avons l'honneur d'avoir comme conférencier un artiste renommé au théâtre du Festival Stratford et ailleurs, et du cinéma et de la télévision en Amérique du Nord, Jonathan Goad. We are truly honored to have as our speaker this evening a man of such renown, not only as an actor in the theater and in television and in film, but also as an outstanding director, Jonathan Goad. I'd like to ask Peter Roberts to come up and formally introduce tonight's 2019 Shakespeare Lecturer. Peter Roberts has been one of Canada's foremost theatre producers, with a long career in the theatre and film industry. Among the highlights of his career include 2 terms at Stratford Festival as a stage manager and a producer, 15 years in the Toronto International Film Festival, and a decade at the National Theatre School in theatre production. Peter?
Well, thank you very much. And as a former producer at Stratford, I was involved in planning the casting that was shared between productions in a repertory theater season upcoming. So I realized that Shakespeare's favorite character name was John. There are at least 18 roles named John in the canon, serving as an all-purpose moniker for heroes, villains, kings, and servants, buffoons, and tragic figures. In discussions with the festival's artistic director and with the show directors for the season, you had to be careful and very specific about which John was being referred to. Although our guest's given name is Jonathan, I'm grateful that he was almost always referred to as Johnny rather than Jon. So it was always clear who was to be contracted. Thanks to the range of his talents, his generosity and sense of adventure, he is regularly the go-to choice when a complex assignment or a counterintuitive combination of parts is on offer. And as far as I know, he hasn't played a Shakespeare John yet. And now for the bits that aren't in his bio. Johnny Goad was born in Toronto, but spent the next 20 years growing up in Bowmanville. For those of us who are geographically challenged, that's just east of Oshawa. In addition to the usual school subjects, Jonathan had diverse extracurricular interests. It seems he studied piano, guitar, French horn, and singing, as well as gymnastics, modern dance, jazz, tap, and soft shoe. He also played and continues to enjoy a variety of sports which risk life and limb and strike fear about accidents and lost performances into every producer's heart. In 1991, he enrolled in a Bachelor of Arts sociology program at the University of Waterloo. But as a volunteer, he auditioned for and was cast in amateur college productions, Paris in Romeo and Juliet, Jesus in Godspell, and the title role in that Scottish play. Whether or not he consciously realized it at the time, Johnny had connected with his own personal way to examine society, social interactions, and the culture of everyday life. Sociology's loss would be professional theatre's gain. He moved to Montreal to attend the National Theatre School of Canada under Perry Schneiderman, and then the Banff Summer School of the Fine Arts. And in 1999, he joined the inaugural cohort at Stratford's Conservatory for Classical Theatre Training under Michael Mawson. As far as Revenue Canada is concerned, actors and directors have long been considered independent contractors, long before the gig economy was so termed. Johnny is a very successful entrepreneur artist. As a highly sought-after stage actor, he has created something like 40 roles during 15 seasons at Stratford and others in productions in Toronto, Winnipeg, Ottawa, and San Francisco. He has played royalty and commoner, friend and traitor, con man and comic, excelling in text, song, dance, and stage combat. He has carried films in lead roles, and for television, he's been a recurring regular or an invited guest star. Johnny invests in the future of the dramatic art, participating in dozens of workshops to develop new plays, and teaching drama students. Coaching student acting projects at National Theatre School was a natural introduction to directing plays. His initial directing assignment with Company Theatre in Toronto was a play by Annie Baker called John, followed by The Crucible by Arthur Miller in the 2019 season at Stratford, which featured John Proctor. Johnny's personal investment in the future is raising a family of 3 daughters, Aviva, age 10, Nina, age 8, and Yeva, age 2, with his wife, actress and prominent movement specialist, Adrienne Gould. He also does renovations on his Stratford home. As I understand it, for The Crucible, Johnny chose to give the actors complete freedom to move wherever they wished on stage, a kind of freestyle blocking. Only the young women's delirium choreography by Adrienne Gould was fixed for safety reasons. It seems to me that Johnny allows, as an actor or a director, space for each artist in the company to work as an ensemble, to seek, discover, and play the truth of their characters and their situations. Perhaps this actor and director hasn't abandoned sociology, but uses it as another lens to inform his work. Please welcome Jonathan Goad.
Thank you very much, Peter. Is this your water? I'll take it. I need it already. Wish it was scotch. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming here tonight, and thank you for inviting me. Friends of, I'm taking my jacket off already because I'm already spitzing. I'm glad there's a lectern because I found when I put on my shirt that I have a missing button, so I've taped myself up. So please don't focus on that. Unless you're bored, focus on that. It's great to be here. This is a city that I lived in for a couple of magical years. I love this city, and so I sort of jumped at the opportunity to come here and be with you tonight. I almost didn't make it. I right now am sleeping with Yeva, the 2-year-old, because if I don't, she sleeps with Mom, and she thinks Mom is a feeding machine. So we share a bed. And my 8 and 10-year-old had joked about coming to Montreal with me, but when I woke up this morning and got them up summarily around 7:45 to get to school, they were convinced they were coming with me, and almost blocked the door before I let them for me to bring them. I got to the airport with an hour to spare, and I realized I was at the wrong airport. And Air Canada was doing a switchover of their entire system today, so I couldn't get anyone on the line. The airports were mad, so I was almost going to drive to Montreal, which is about a 7-hour trek from where I was. But I took a chance, went down to Bishop Airport, and a very, very kind Porter Airport attendant got me a new flight in about 10 minutes. So anyway, I got here just in the nick, and I'm thrilled to be here. I don't give lectures very often. You're not my first audience, but I typically am up here speaking words or in front of a crowd, speaking words by far better crafted playwrights and wordsmiths than myself. Though tonight, it's me. I'm still going to borrow a bit of the Shakespeare, so whenever I'm feeling shy, and so anyway, I was asked to give a title for this talk tonight, and taking ownership was kind of the best I could do. Why? Because taking ownership may be the best, and it's not a great, but it's maybe the best way I can summarize my own life in the theater, my own journey that I've taken in the theater, my own stamping the ground that I live on in the theater, and also what I would describe as what I think the journey is for the actor inside a role and inside their own career. And to do so, I'm grateful for this opportunity because it gave me, who is a mid-career artist, something that, a mid-career artist with 3 kids under 10 doesn't normally give themselves the permission to do, and that's have a moment of reflection. In fact, most artists don't want to describe themselves as mid-career, or worst of all, senior artist. But, I look back on 25 years, a quarter century of working in the theater plus, and I realized that's just what I am. So in doing so, I also I thought to myself, what might be most interesting for myself and for you is to examine the roots of things, examine the roots of maybe how I ended up here, because I don't have a particularly exceptional story of how I became an artist, but I definitely had one that was full of, it wasn't entirely typical. It was full of many moments of doubt, regret, and what I would call, for lack of a better way to put it, self-sabotage, where some part of me, even though I had amazing and supportive parents, kept believing that a life in the theater was not a life. But I'm here today to say it is. So anyway, I'm going to jump right in. Ownership. My job, simply stated, is to take ownership. Take ownership of the words that are allotted me by a playwright. Inside of a play that has been created by the playwright. And while my job can be stated simply, it can be summarized simply, the task of taking ownership is rarely straightforward. It requires a mercurial mixture of sensitivity, curiosity, deductive and critical thinking, excitement, devotion, rigor, and a host of technical facilities: pronunciation, elocution, enunciation, projection, breath availability, and control, among other things. And perhaps most importantly, at least in my view, is ownership requires imagination, honesty, and above all, vulnerability. And all of this serves in the hope of creating the conditions for an authentic, living and listening and spontaneous play on a stage. So I'm going to attempt to elucidate what I mean by that. Ownership, and in particular, as it may apply to an actor who is facing a role inside a Shakespeare play. I realize that the overwhelming consistency in my life is Shakespeare. He's been my most constant companion, my dance partner, if you will. Don't tell my wife. I'm going to share with you some of that life, and I'll skim the surface of some things, and I'll get a bit deeper elsewhere. And I'm going to revisit some old friends, and I think you'll find it interesting that engaging with the bard over the span of a career, 25 or 50 years, takes on a cyclical and somewhat mystical experience. So, some brief history about me. I'm the son of immigrant parents who came here in 1968. They arrived by boat. They had a babe in arms, my eldest brother. They had one on the way, my middle brother. And I was but a twinkle in the eye. My mom was a high school teacher, phys ed and English. My father was an engineer's draftsman, but he was also a secret and total artist. He did what he thought was right to provide for a family, and he surrendered a career playing jazz trombone. He was also a gifted visual artist and a caricaturist, and he was as good an actor as I could ever hope to be. My mother, too, surrendered high school when we settled in Bowmanville, which is pronounced Beaumeville. And she became a local legend teaching at the Beaumeville Nursery School because she could have her 3 young sons in school with her while she taught. We worked it out that she made what we think is an average of $250 an hour in the entirety of her career. She was the first nursery school teacher in the province to institute a physical education program for 3- and 4-year-olds and wrote on it extensively in publications. She became a legend. She instilled good manners, somersaults, and the love of play and song. She firmly believed that children should be seen and heard, and that children are always more intelligent than they are given credit for, and that imaginative play and circle time are the foundation and the building blocks of a great life. In Bowmanville, she is, in Bowmanville and beyond, she is known essentially as the closest thing to a live version of Mary Poppins. She had a song for everything. What my parents lacked in resources, financial, they made up for in love. My brothers and I hit the jackpot, as we often say, on the parent front. So we settled in Bowmanville, Beeville, wide open spaces, small town sports. But something I don't know, and I don't have the answer for, is that in grade 7, I used to slip into the library at lunchtime. I was 13, and I would read from the collection of the complete works of William Shakespeare. I don't know what led me to do so. It might have been my English cousins that were reading and seeing his plays by the age of 6. I don't know. But every lunch hour, there I was, giving up on lunchtime sports games, which were very important to me, and sometimes reading 2 of his works in 1 hour, between bites of my roast beef bun and homemade tarts. Now, before you think that I'm a bardolatry savant, or more likely an exaggerating extraordinaire, these versions of the complete works were big on pictures, selective, and extremely abridged in text. Each one was about 7 pages long. They were also compelling as hell. And I recall the Scottish play, which Peter alluded to, Macker's, let's call it. I remember that holding a particular interest for me, 13-year-old with energy to burn. I might have read that one a couple times. Now, cut to grade 9. Miss Wheatley, our English teacher, went on maternity leave, leaving a first-time substitute teacher, Mrs. Brown, lovely Mrs. Brown, tossed in with a bunch of unruly minor niners with the task of teaching us Twelfth Night. And what I think was an act of desperation and distraction, she assigned parts and we played the play. Instantly, life entered the room. Instantly, the most bored among us had a blast. In an instant, it was revealed and confirmed that Shakespeare can be studied as great literature, but he is just, first and foremost, and lastly, a theater artist of the rarest kind. I wanted to play Sir Toby, but it went to the student who could belch on cue. So, I got Malvolio. Malvolio is walking by himself in the garden. "'Tis but fortune, all is fortune." Maria told me she, meaning Olivia, did affect me once, and I have heard herself come thus near, that should she fancy, it should be one of my complexion. Besides, she uses me with a more exalted respect than any one else that follows her. What should I think on't? To be Count Malvolio. Having been 3 months married to her, sitting in my state, calling my officers about me in my branched velvet gown, having come from a daybed where I have left Olivia sleeping, and then to have the humor of state after a demure travel of regard, telling them I know my place as they would do theirs, to ask for my kinsman Toby. 7 of my people, with an obedient start, make out for him. I frown the while, perchance wind up my watch, or play with some rich jewel. Toby approaches, curtsies there to me. I extend my hand to him thus, quenching my familiar smile with an austere regard of control, saying, "Cousin Toby, you must amend your drunkenness. Besides, you waste the treasure of your time with a foolish knight, one Sir Andrew." A letter drops. What employment have we here? So we studied Shakespeare, a Shakespeare play, every subsequent year in high school. And while I enjoyed them immensely, there was nothing quite like that which lived up to the substitute teacher Brown's spontaneous production of Twelfth Night, starring an early pubescent class of grade 9E. And my strongest artistic impulses at the time were still visual, so I thought little of that experience in grade 9. But perhaps I spied my first experience of taking ownership. Now, in high school, I had an extraordinary experience where I went to a high school in the middle of a country, in the countryside, and we had little exposure to live theater, but I had some great teachers, and they made a point of taking us to the theater in Toronto, in the big city. And in grade 11, I went to see a play called B-Movie the Play, which starred Stephen Ouimet. And the following year, I saw a touring production of Timberlake Wuttenbacher's Our Country's Good. Some of you may be familiar with that, and that's about the settling of Australia, the penal colonies in Australia, and a compassionate officer decides to put on a play, the recruiting officer, and he convinces the other officers to let the penal colony, some of the prisoners, participate in the play. So it's about the redemptive power of the theater and about how everyone has a place in the theater and how being in the theater can create for you a feeling of humanity. Now, when I saw both of these plays, including the play earlier and B-Movie the Play, this is hard to understand probably for you, and it certainly is for me nowadays, but I didn't understand that the people up on stage actually had a job. I mean, clearly what they were doing was far superior to what I was doing in high school, but I didn't realize that that is something you could legitimately make as a life choice. So I sort of sat in delight and awe, but I still didn't make the connection that that could be me up there. The work was so extraordinary, the players were so extraordinary, there was so much joy in the theater. But it was transformative for me, those simple excursions into the big city, to see that kind of work. I sat in marvel of these British actors doing Our Country's Good, and that the following night they would do The Recruiting Officer, which is the play within the play of Our Country's Good. At the last minute in high school, I was going into a stream that was I was very politically active in high school, in student government. I had been the prime minister for a couple of years. And so not that prime minister, and less makeup. But sorry. But the prime minister of my school, and so I'd always been sort of politically active, and public speaking was something I was always a part of. So I was sort of encouraged, if you had the marks, that you got out of that town of Bowmanville and you went to university, that's something that could feed your particular talents. And so I was sort of pushed always towards English or law. So I was sort of on that path, and right at the last minute in grade 13, I think just before submissions for university were due, I went to the guidance counselor and I said, I think I want to be an actor. And back in those days, of course, this is I'm dating myself, of course, but in the late 80s, this was the Commodore 64 and the floppy disk. So Miss Monroe stuck it in the machine and said, let's see what's out there. And there was no question, there was no going to colleges, there was no talk of the National Theatre School. If you had the marks, you went to university. So she said there's only one place to go, and that's York University. So sure enough, I auditioned for York University. I used a monologue from Our Country's Good. And I got in, earned a place among the 120 students they'd taken first year. Then they in the second year cut it down to a company of 25 or something. But within a month of being there, I realized it wasn't for me. It's a very good program, but they insisted on a total immersion in the program. You weren't allowed to play extracurricular sports. And to be quite frank, I was probably my own wild oats were going to get me out of that school anyway. So within a month, I left school. I ended up being a supply teacher for a year, and I also volunteered everywhere I could. And I discovered social work, which had always sort of been in my family because my mom had, as a gifted nursery school teacher, often took into her care kids with special needs. So it was in the family, and it meant a lot to me. And so I ultimately found a social work / social development studies / sociology psychology program at the University of Waterloo. So that's how I ended up there, with no thought of ever going into the theater again. It was my brief stint with being a professional actor was 1 month at York University. But I fell in love with a young woman who was studying theater at the University of Waterloo. I told her I liked the theater, and I think she thought I was just trying to ingratiate myself further to her. But she said, there's auditions coming up for Romeo and Juliet. And at that drama department at the time, anyone in the school, including Wilfrid Laurier down the road, the high school down the road as we used to call it, could audition for department productions. So I attended a group audition, and I found out later that I was cast as Paris, as Peter alluded to in his remarks, because I reminded the director of an ex-boyfriend, one that she held little fondness for now. You see, she had a vision for the play, and the play was to be set in 1950s Italy. Two mafia families warring, and Paris, rather than the ill-fortuned, clueless suitor to Juliet, who, in my opinion, does seem to have some genuine affection for Juliet in that arranged marriage kind of way. The director saw Paris as a nefarious social climber with a voracious appetite for sex, drugs, and money. He was also having an affair with Lady Capulet. If you can find some textual evidence for that, I'd be impressed. As corrupt an interpretation as that was, it was a blast. I was booed when I kissed Juliet. They screamed when I shamelessly indicated the sexual reading of the line, "I would that Thursday were tomorrow," going as far as to grab my crotch. And they cheered when Juliet killed me, or when Romeo killed me in the tomb. What I was doing in the tomb, robbing the body and necrophilia, anyone? So, we played to packed student houses, and they ate it up. It was a blast. They cheered and they cried for the star-crossed lovers. They laughed with Mercutio. They saw themselves, and so did I. And I secretly marveled at the actor playing Romeo. He was passionate, funny, original, athletic, heartbreaking, with a natural ease of the language. He owned it. His Juliet was quite fine too. And together they embodied teen love, lust, passion, and they angst and raged against the world that had oppressed them so. And Shakespeare, believe it or not, survived my bombastic Paris interpretation. I was hooked. I was already turning away from sociology, though yet I did not want to admit it. No ownership yet. I immediately auditioned for a second-year acting class in which the focus was The Merchant of Venice. It was taught by a man named Joel Greenberg, who now runs a company called Studio 180, a very, very socially outreaching political company in Toronto, which is a fine, fine company and frequently casts great actors in great, great vital plays. I needed a Shakespeare soliloquy. So I found a character I'd never heard of in a play I didn't know. It was Angelo from Measure for Measure, and because it was the first monologue I ever learned in Shakespeare, I think I can still do it from memory. We must not make a scarecrow of the law, Aeschylus, setting it up to fear the birds of prey, and let it keep one shape, till custom make it their perch and not their terror. 'Tis one thing to be tempted, Aeschylus, another thing to fall. I not deny the jury, passing on the prisoner's life, may in the sworn 12 have a thief or two, guiltier than him they try. What's open made to justice, that justice seizes. What knows the law that thieves do pass on thieves? 'Tis very pregnant. The jewel that we find, we stoop and take it because we see it. But that which we do not see, we tread upon and never think on't. You may not so extenuate him for his offense, for I have had such faults, but rather tell me, when I that censure him do so offend, let mine own judgment pattern out my death, and nothing come impartial. Sir, he must die. The following year, the department was to put on Twelfth Night. It was a slightly abridged text with many songs added. I once again played Malvolio. I rode my stunt BMX bike. Feste, that glorious actor that played Romeo, was on rollerblades. My girlfriend, the same one that inspired me to, or challenged me to audition for Romeo and Juliet, played a wonderful viola. And I recall a Latin samba number with, I think it was a Fantasia on shortly after courting Olivia in yellow stockings and cross-gartered. It went something like, what did she say to my eyes? I. What did she say to my thighs? I. You get the point. It was a blast. Around this time, I started skipping the occasional afternoon of sociology class because I had not yet switched majors, and I would take in a matinee at the Stratford Festival, which was a mere half hour away, and for $10 I could sit in the worst seat in the house, though no seat in the festival theater is poor, as you know. Before this, I'd never heard of Stratford. I think the annual Stratford trip at Bonneville High School got canceled because of some unruly behavior before I even got there. What I saw at Stratford floored me. Also that year, Fight Master John Stead of the Stratford Festival came out and taught a weekly stage combat class to a hungry group of drama students. What John was doing there, I didn't know, except I found later that Joel Greenberg had given him one of his first jobs. So a bit of payback. This extraordinary artist, renowned in the world for his skill and talent for teaching and creating stage choreography, came out and gave us a class twice a week. We ate it up, we fought, we fell, we worshipped John. We began to talk like him, walk like him. He instilled discipline and respect and safety. And his ultimate message was self-responsibility, self-ownership. We respected him so much that we didn't mention the 2 or 3 times that campus police were called to break up what had been reported as a fight, but was actually one of our personally, elaborately staged combat routines that we had decided to do in the campus common area. No charges were filed. The next year, my favorite from grade 7, in the grade 7 library, was on the department playbill, Mackers. John Stead would choreograph it. If you can imagine that. Just give us a moment. Thank you. That's all right. I keep talking. So, I played the Thane. It's okay, I gotta find it anyway. This is the comedy portion. Oh, there it is. Mackers. If 'twere done when 'tis done, then 'twere well it were done quickly. No pressure. If the assassination, don't get nervous, could trammel up the consequence and catch with his surcease success, but that his blow might be the be-all and the end-all here. But here, upon this bank and shoal of time, we jump the life to come. But in these cases, we still have judgment here, that we but teach bloody instructions, which being taught return to plague the inventor. This even-handed justice commends the ingredients of our poisoned chalice to our own lips. We good? He's here in double trust. First, as I am his kinsman and his subject, strong both against the deed, then as his host, who should against his murderer shut the door, not bear the knife myself. Besides, this Duncan hath borne his faculties so meek, hath been so clear in his great office, that his virtues will plead like angels, trumpet-tongued, against the deep damnation of his taking off, and pity like a naked newborn babe striding the blast, or heaven's cherubim horsed upon the sightless couriers of the air, shall blow the horrid deed in every eye, that tears shall drown the wind. I have no spur to prick the sides of my intent, but only vaulting ambition, which o'erleaps itself and falls on the other. Myself and some 20 young men shaved our heads bald. Art students from the art department decorated our bodies in warrior tattoos from neck to ankle. They used surgical markers, so it stayed on for 2 weeks or more. We wore loincloths and combat boots, and we swung 3-foot broadswords supplied by John Stead. Blood was everywhere, and it was a blast. I was hooked. I switched majors practically on closing night. I auditioned for the National Theatre School, and I auditioned with Edmund. Thou nature art my goddess, to thy law my services are bound. Wherefore should I stand in the plague of custom and permit the curiosity of nations to deprive me, for that I am some 12 or 14 moonshines lag of a brother? Why bastard? Wherefore base? When my dimensions are as well compact, my mind as generous, and my shape as true, as honest madam's issue, why brand they us with base, with baseness, bastardy, base? Who in the lusty stealth of nature take more composition and fierce quality than doth within a dull, stale, tired bed go to the creating a whole tribe of fops got tween asleep and wake? Well then, legitimate Edgar, I must have your land. Our father's love is to the bastard Edmund as to the legitimate. Fine word. Legitimate. Well, my legitimate, if this letter speed and my invention thrive, Edmund the base shall top the legitimate. I grow, I prosper. Now, gods, stand up for bastards. So it was off to Montreal. But just before I get into Montreal, I'll mention that the last thing I did in Waterloo was an outdoor production of Cymbeline. It was my first outdoor Shakespeare, which felt kind of amazing and natural. The play was strange and wonderful. I wanted to play Iachimo, but I played, I can't even think of his name right now. But a funny story, I was also working part-time at a bar, and some of the other guys working at the bar with me as well worked for the city of Waterloo as groundskeeps and as parks and rec. And one day in the middle of a performance, we had borrowed some stuff from Stratford, including the genuine carcass of a deer for the, if anyone knows the play of Cymbeline, there's a couple of great characters who come back from a hunt, the brothers. And we got this incredible prop, which was actually it was probably used in their last production of Cymbeline, and it was a genuine carcass of a deer. So before the show, we used to hang it just off to the side of the band shell in a tree, because the prop had to be hung because it was on a pole. Another part of Waterloo Park has a petting zoo, and it has a healthy set of deer over there. So someone had made a terrified, petrified 911 call to the police, not to the Parks and Rec, but to the police, saying that someone is killing the deer in Waterloo Park, and talked of the fear of satanic ritual and whatever else. And so before the police jumped on it, they called Parks and Rec, who I guess could probably get there faster. So in the middle of one of our shows, a Parks and Rec truck drove down the big embankment, sort of natural amphitheater that's created there in Waterloo Park. And as they headed right towards the stage, and all of us stopped on stage and saw this truck heading right towards the stage, it suddenly went into a four-wheel lockup and turned to the side, and I recognized one of the boys that I worked with from the bar. And I saw him look, I saw him think, I saw him laugh, and I saw him squeal out of there. Fortunately, I told him a couple days earlier that I was doing this play in Waterloo Park, and I didn't actually mention that there was a deer, but I think he put two and two together and realized that someone had mistaken a prop for the merciless killing of deer. I landed in Montreal in the late summer of 1995. NTS was then, and as it is now, a magical place. I'd never heard of NTS until my last year of university. As I said, it wasn't on the floppy disk back in high school, and my avoidance of a life in the theater and a major had kept it out of my sights. But by the last year of university, I'd heard about it, auditioned, got in. The theater school at that time, and likely still now, I'm not sure, but it was steeped in a tradition with a heavy emphasis on classical theater. And it had a deep connection to Stratford. Many of the teachers there were also moonlighting at Stratford. In my second year, I met Michael Mawson. He was a chain-smoking, deeply ironic curmudgeon with an unmatched, instinctual love of Shakespeare and a passion for working with young actors. Under his care and tutelage, pardon this expression, but shit got real. He had a wry sense of humor, but I'm not sure what he would have made of my samba dancing, BMX bike riding Malvolio, or to say nothing of my sociopathic Paris. But I think he would have approved of my skinhead tattooed Mackers, because I was finally taking some ownership. From Michael, I never stopped learning. He made us learn and internalize the iambic pentameter so much that it became subconscious. It was the subconscious heartbeat that ran through the center of every play, through the center of every character. It was the horse. It connected player to player, player to audience, audience to story, player to story. He was the first person that insisted that the job was to work the text until you were bleeding from the eyes. You worked the text till it worked you. You played the text till it played you. Now that sounds ethereal, and it is. It's also practical, and it's real. But it's a tall drink of beer, as he would say. He spoke of 3 phases of the rehearsal. Work. Work till it works you. Play till it begins to play you. And then carnival. What's carnival? Carnival is when you share it, which is the goal of all theater ultimately anyway. And in carnival, all the work you've done, all the play you've done is not the focus. The focus is sharing. Ultimately, your job as an actor is to get out of the way. Something he would say ad nauseum. He would sometimes add an expletive. Get out of the way. In room 1, which is the center room at NTS, they used to serve as a courtroom for the boys' reform school back in the day, Michael led us through The Winter's Tale, one of his favorite plays. I'd never encountered this play. I thought, what is this thing? It's part comedy, part tragedy. A child dies for real. It's a tragicomedy. It's a romance. A bear tears a man apart. A statue comes to life. Apollo is consulted. It's one of the last plays he wrote, and we think it's his most personal because he lost a child. And it's consumed with the notion of forgiveness. I didn't know what this thing was. I've directed it 4 times since. In that production, I played Leontes. Pardon my filing system. It's very primitive. So is the playwright. Inch thick, knee deep, o'er head and ears a forked one. Go play, boy, play. Thy mother plays, and I play too, but so disgraced a part, whose issue will hiss me to my grave. Contempt and clamor will be my knell. Go play, boy, play. There have been, or I am much deceived, cuckolds ere now, and many a man there is, even at this present now, whilst I speak this, holds his wife by the arm, that little thinks she has been sluiced in's absence, and his pond fished by his next neighbor, by Sir Smile, his neighbor. Nay, there's comfort in't. While other men have gates, and those gates opened as mine against their will, should all despair that have revolted wives, the 10th of mankind would hang themselves. Physic for it there's none. It is a body planet that will strike where 'tis predominant, and 'tis powerful, think it, from east, west, north, and south, be it concluded, no barricado for a belly. Know it. It will let in and out the enemy with bag and baggage. Many thousand once have the disease and feel't not. How now, boy? Now, I have never and will never play Hermione, though I did play Titania once. But her words in the trial scene, for any of you who are familiar with The Winter's Tale, are some of my favorites, so I've given myself the permission to speak a few of them. After a fairly extensive and remarkable argument, one of the last things Hermione says is, "Sir, spare your threats. The bug which you would fright me with, I seek. To me can life be no commodity. The crown and comfort of my life, your favor, I do give lost, for I do feel it gone, but know not how it went. My second joy and first fruits of my body, from his presence I am barred like one infectious. My third comfort, starred most unluckily, is from my breast, the innocent milk in its most innocent mouth, haled out to murder. Myself on every post proclaimed a strumpet, with immodest hatred, the child-bed privilege denied, which longs to women of all fashion. Lastly, hurried here to this place, in the open air, before I have got strength of limit, now my liege. Tell me what blessings I have here alive, that I should fear to die. Therefore proceed. But yet hear this, mistake me not, no life, I prize it not a straw, but for mine honor, which I would free. If I shall be condemned upon surmises, all proofs sleeping but what your jealousies awake, I tell you, 'tis rigor and not law. Your honors all, I do refer me to the oracle, Apollo be my judge. As some of you know, Apollo rules her, utterly innocent of Leontes' mad jealousy. At the same time, her son, or her daughter, has been stripped from her. Her son dies in prison. One of the first sort of psychological cases in literature of a child dying of heartbreak. Her daughter is left by the unfortunate Antigonus on the beach. He can't bring himself to kill the child, but he also can't bring himself to deny his cruel master, or his incensed master, Leontes. As soon as he leaves the child to the nature of the elements, he is pursued by a bear. And on comes the old shepherd. I would there were no age between 10 and 3 and 20, or that youth would sleep out the rest, for there is nothing in between but getting wenches with child, wronging the ancientry, stealing, fighting. Hark ye now! Would any but these boiled brains of 19 and 2 and 20 hunt this weather? They've scared away 2 of my best sheep, which I fear the wolf will sooner find than the master. If anywhere I have them, 'tis by the seaside, browsing of ivy. Good luck and be thy will. What do we hear? Mercy on's a barn. A very pretty barn. Boy or a child, I wonder. A pretty one, a very pretty one. Sure, some scape. Though I'm not bookish, I can read waiting gentlewomen in the scape. This has been some stair work, some trunk work, some behind door work. They were warmer that got this than the poor thing is here. I'll take it up for pity. Yet I'll tarry till my son come. He hallowed, but even now. In that same production, in a crazy bit of double casting, I played Autolycus the thief. I have served Prince Florizel, and in my time wore 3 pile, but now I'm out of service. My traffic is sheets. When the kite builds, look to lesser linen. My father named me Autolycus, who, being as I am, littered under Mercury, was likewise a snapper-up of unconsidered trifles. With dye and drab I purchased this caparison, and my revenue is the silly cheat. Gallows and knock are too powerful on the highway. Beating and hangings are terrors to me. For the life to come, I sleep out the thought of it. prize, a prize. I hung around the Winter's Tale world because it was a turning point for me, or it was a moment in time when I began to take ownership. Under Michael's tutelage, I took ownership of language. I took ownership of my training, my passions. Michael became my Shakespeare guru, though that's a title he would hate. And while working with him, I had my own first instincts to teach. That same year, at the National Theatre School, I met my second great inspirational teacher at the school, Mr. David Latham. And though we worked on Chekhov, his actor-driven approach to the theater influenced me greatly, and does to this day. David worked with what's called imaging, or an imaging technique that takes ownership of language in a mysterious and yet practical way. It's deep, it's personal, it's patient, it's slow, it's painful, it's awkward, it's hilarious, it's real. This technique is a regular part of my teaching now. Now, NTS is a 3-year program. I did too. I left after my second year. I'll touch on it just briefly, but I fell off the horse. I didn't have ownership. I left after my second year. I probably got scared because the work got real. I think things probably felt too good. I momentarily thought I might be living my father's own dream, or at least his dream for me. I may have been testing myself. I don't really know, but it was a big decision and a strange one because I'd never felt really more at home in my life. Irregardless of the reason, it was self-sabotage, and it is the opposite of ownership. I followed my girlfriend, an NTS playwright, to Toronto. Joel Greenberg from the University of Waterloo put me back on the horse. I did 225 performances of the complete works of William Shakespeare abridged. 37 plays in 97 minutes, a combination of Looney Tunes meets Monty Python meets stupidity. 3 men who don't belong in any Shakespeare play, so they decide to put on the whole canon. But it was a big hit. We played to audiences of 6, we played to audiences of 600, we played to audiences that were entirely English as a second language. We played to nursing homes. It was naked, it was raw, it was hilarious, and it was Shakespeare on some level. At the end of that contract, Michael Mawson called and said he'd just been made the principal of the inaugural Stratford Festival Conservatory for Classical Theatre. He wanted to offer me a salaried spot in the class, paid to learn from my most brilliant Shakespeare teacher, and a place in the Stratford company. Pretty dreamy. I still had to audition for the artistic director, and in fact, I had to audition for the entire panel of directors that season. An 11-person panel plus a few casting directors. But if I got Richard Manette's stamp in particular, I was in. I auditioned with Henry V. What treasure, uncle? His uncle says, tennis balls, my liege. We are glad the Dauphin is so pleasant with us. His present and your pains we thank you for. When we have matched our rackets to these balls, we will in France, by God's grace, play a set shall strike his father's crown into the hazard. Tell him he hath made a match with such a wrangler that all the courts of France will be disturbed with chases, and we understand him well. How he comes o'er us with our wilder days, not measuring what use we made of them. We never valued this poor seat of England, and therefore living hence did give ourselves to barbarous license, as 'tis ever common that men are merriest when they are from home. But tell the Dauphin I will keep my state. be like a king, and show my sail of greatness when I do rouse me in my throne of France. For that I have laid by my majesty and plodded like a man for working days. But I will rise there with so full a glory that I will dazzle all the eyes of France, yea, strike the Dauphin blind to look on us, and tell the pleasant prince, this mock of his hath turned his balls to gunstones, and his soul shall stand sore charged for the wasteful vengeance that shall fly with them. For many 1,000 widows shall this his mock out of their dear husbands, mock mothers from their sons, mock castles down, and yet some are yet ungotten and unborn that shall have cause to curse the Dauphin's scorn. But this all lies within the will of God, to whom I do appeal, and in whose name tell you, the Dauphin, I am coming on to venge me as I may, and to put forth my rightful hand in a well-hallowed cause. So get you hence in peace, and tell the Dauphin, his jest will savor but of shallow wit, when thousands weep more than did laugh at it. Convey them with safe conduct, fare you well. I got into the conservatory, and it was everything and more. Now, I confess our conservatory, 9 weeks long, was a little wine-soaked. It was January and February in Stratford. The snow is about as high as it is in Montreal. At the end of each day in the rehearsal hall, we exhaustedly would trope down the road to a bar called Down the Street. That's literally the name of it. And we would fiercely discuss the plays. We would discuss theater. We would laugh. Michael would hold court. He would sit at a round table where, after his death, they erected a plaque that said, "Keep a smile behind your eyes, Michael Mawson." Sounds simple, but that's part of ownership. I may get back to that. But a curious thing happened in the first season at Stratford. I was given the role of Theseus, half-god ruler of Athens in A Midsummer Night's Dream, playing opposite the powerhouse Diane d'Aquila as Hippolyta. In fact, the whole cast was great, except me. I was overparted, as they say. I was playing the shape of the man, not the man. I was self-conscious, not really playing anything, not playing an action, no ownership. I wanted to blame the director or the process, which wasn't perfect. Why wasn't Michael Mawson there to guide me moment by moment to say the right thing? He was around. He was responsible. He was a text coach on all the plays. He gave me a few amazing notes, one being, "You're playing a planet, not just a man." Do with that what you will. But when I said Theseus' first words of the play, which are the first words of the play, and it was the play that opened the season that year, I'd never felt less at home on a stage in my life. I mean, I'd been bad before, but I still felt like I belonged. I wanted to quit. Alan McGuinness, who was a great teacher and friend that I met at NTS, came to see it a couple weeks after opening and said to me, Alan, by the way, is also the artistic director of Young People's Theatre in Toronto. Great director and a lovely, lovely man. He said the bad ones are important, maybe just as important as the good ones. You don't want too many of them, but they're important. They force you to ask yourself, how much does the work mean to you? So I didn't quit, and I spent the remainder of that season reading everything I could about Theseus. I read every picture book in the library, ones that are designated for 3 to 5-year-olds. I read young adult fiction of Theseus' life. I read academic entries, everything I could find. I wrote a play about Theseus. I filled my head with images of Greek gods and Greek landscape. I never became a fine Theseus, not in my first season. But I did get better, and I began to find my own way of navigating characters in the midst of one of Shakespeare's incredible worlds, so that I could never feel like I get caught on my back foot again. How are we doing? Time? All right, well, that's good. I'll finish with Theseus. Hippolytus says, "'Tis strange, my Theseus, that these lovers speak of." Theseus says, "More strange than true. I never may believe these antique fables, nor these fairy toys. Lovers and madmen have such seething brains, such shaping fantasies that apprehend more than cool reason ever comprehends. The lunatic, the lover, and the poet are of imagination all compact. One sees more devils than vast hell can hold. That's the madman. The lover, all is frantic, sees Helen's beauty in a brow of Egypt. The poet's eye, in a fine frenzy rolling, doth glance from heaven to earth, from earth to heaven. And as imagination bodies forth the forms of things unknown, the poet's pen turns them to shapes and gives to a cry nothing, a local habitation and a name. Such tricks hath strong imagination, that if it would but apprehend some joy, it comprehends some bringer of that joy, or in the night, imagining some fear, how easy is a bush supposed a bear." Thank you. Yeah, absolutely, yeah, for sure. My life is as open as my shirt, so... Yeah.
Oh, on the end.
Oh.
Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. No, before the question, just I'll never see Paris the same way again. Thanks for that. You're talking about taking ownership. I was wondering if there's a different, it's more difficult or a different process of taking ownership, for example, of Hamlet, as opposed to a less played character like Henry VIII.
The question was, is there a different process in taking ownership? As I've said many times, taking ownership of a character like Hamlet, which is the longest part Shakespeare, well, not actually the longest part he wrote, but the longest part in a single play he wrote, as opposed to a character like Henry VIII, which is at times a sketch and a shorter character. I don't think necessarily. You know, I mean, I know as many times as I've said it, this idea of taking ownership is probably still to a certain extent a mystery. But what it does more than anything is, my own life in the theater has been deeply influenced by a company called the Company Theater. And that Peter alluded to this in his opening comments about the fact that when I directed The Crucible this summer, I tried to create a playground, a sandbox, if you will, for the actors to live within, but within that to have an enormous amount of agency. And so, while on simple terms, they get to move where they want. But of course, that's a far more complex and sophisticated process than simply wandering around. If anything, it requires more rigor. And the same sort of goes for language. I feel, you know, what makes Shakespeare probably unique to, say, modern playwrights, but modern playwrights certainly are in this because there are many, many great modern playwrights for whom language is one of their great features. But Shakespeare, arguably, of course, the extraordinary word crafter that he is, language is one of his defining features, one of his greatest features. So taking ownership of his language is is always a tall drink of beer. And so no matter who you're playing, you're responsible for that language. You're responsible for the actions, the thoughts, the words, the feelings of everything. It's a bottomless and endless process. And I've not met a play, I've not met a character that is small enough that you can kind of, shirk ownership, if you will. Hamlet actually is surprisingly forgiving in that Hamlet, I stayed away from Hamlet tonight for obvious reasons, in some ways, because it's about 1,000 lectures on its own. But Hamlet is a play. The actor playing Hamlet, and I've literally seen it. You can kind of blow the first 3 monologues and still redeem yourself because there's so much play to play. Now, when I say blow the monologues, I don't mean, that's sort of deductive and speaking cruelly of it. But what I mean is there's an awful lot of playing to play up there. And you have the good fortune of being in a part which is so vast, so centered in the human experience, so inexplicable. It's beyond our it's always slightly out of reach, and yet Hamlet is literally all of us. That's why I would happily pay to see a 90-year-old man, an 11-year-old girl, a 41-year-old mid-career woman play the part, because Hamlet is all of us. He is both everything and nothing. And so in a funny way, the ownership of his language is an incredibly tall task. You never get it in one go. You never get it in one show. It just doesn't happen. That said, the process of taking ownership of language is a vast one, and it's one that every one of Shakespeare's characters offers the opportunity to revel in extraordinary language, and the task is huge. Does that answer your question? Yeah? Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for being here at McGill. I was wondering if, based on your experience, you feel that there is a Shakespearean philosophy of life or in general, and if so, to what extent it's shaped your life philosophy or inspired reflection?
Thank you. That's a great question. I'm sure everybody heard that. That's what's sort of funny. I was saying that, he's been my biggest dance partner. And that, as you, I only touched on it very briefly. There are many, many more examples of the kind of strange cyclical nature of how these plays enter and leave your life. Sometimes it's just watching them. Some of my finest experiences. I saw a friend of mine, Graham Abbey, play Hamlet in a tiny production in the park shortly after his own father had died. And I don't know I don't know if I'll ever see a performance like that of that part again. That said, I've seen many, many great Hamlets. For me, so all that to say that Shakespeare, if you spend time with him, he does become, to a certain extent, your church. Now, I don't know I have no idea what his own personal, a lot of people have very strong opinions about what his personal religious affiliation and spirituality was, but I know for me, the biggest thing about Shakespeare, being someone who's largely secular anyway, but definitely spiritual, I'm in the theater after all, is that I believe Shakespeare is the great asker of questions. His plays are fraught with questions and with no simple answers. And I will say the one reason I dwelt a bit more on The Winter's Tale, it's a play I'm constantly fascinated by, is because I think that play, like a lot of his last plays, the romances as they call them, are consumed with this idea of forgiveness. Because at the end of the day, at the end of an incredibly hard life, or at any point in an incredibly hard life, and life can be hard, what really is there in defiance of things is love and forgiveness. Shakespeare seems to be testing these things in his last plays. Can you be treated so obtusely, you and your young daughter, by a family member, cast off on a deserted island, left for dead in the sea? Can you forgive those relatives? Can you effectively cause the death of your own child, put your own innocent wife on trial for something she did not do with the harshest of punishments, and be forgiven by her 17 years later? These are the questions which I think are the most penetrating, and they are without answer. They are imperfect, but they're deeply human. So I would say Shakespeare in many ways is, as some of you probably know, Harold Bloom, a great Shakespeare scholar, wrote a book called I believe he called it The Invention of the Human Being, because he believes that Shakespeare literally was kind of in affirming and confirming ourselves to ourselves as he was writing. And so in many ways, I think he is the ultimate humanist. Yeah. Yeah.
First of all, thank you. That was wonderful. I don't think
Oh, I recognize you.
Yes,
Hi.
I recognize you too. Hi. Taking ownership, I don't think I'll ever watch another Shakespeare production without thinking of those two words. But you mentioned spontaneity and how important that is. So is that tied to being courageous? It seems to me if you're going to be spontaneous in a role, you also have to be really courageous to put yourself out there and in the role and inhabit the role.
Yeah, and I feel like, it sort of speaks to, I touched on it with a bit of a quick descript of what happened with the Crucible this summer. It's my feeling that an event called live theater has to be alive. Now, many great actors and also some great directors have different feelings about these things, and they believe that you can rehearse with a specificity to within an inch of its life, and there can still be life inside. And I'm not here to dispel that as a possibility. But for me, my greatest joy and interest, both when I watch and when I play, is to maximize freedom on the stage and to maximize the experience of reliving and rediscovering. Actually, just quite simply, the best way to put it is to re-rehearse the play every night. Opening night means nothing. Closing night means nothing. The time in between means nothing, in that we are never trying to reach a certain place. We are surrounded by literature that can survive us re-rehearsing that play, even to the point of fault. Even to allow that some nights it's not going to be perfect, but what it will be is alive. And so that's what I'm sort of interested in risking as an actor. And it's like today, some of these old friends, as I call them, I decided, you know what, I'm not going to go back and read them over, even though some of them I haven't seen for 14 years, which probably was maybe a bit of a mistake. But, the point being that I'm always looking for ways to maximize the experience of experiencing something for the first time. And I know that sounds like a paradox, but it really is possible because I've had that experience. You cannot save the play. I don't believe people are in the theater to see something that is perfectly rehearsed. I mean, that's not true. You can perfectly rehearse something, but they're not there to see something perfectly executed. I think people in the theater are looking for a live experience. And even though it is rehearsed, and it can be rehearsed 1,000 times, but with the goal of returning to where you came from and knowing the place for the first time. Does that make sense? Not easy. Really tall drink of beer and fraught with fear. It does take courage. I think, they're not alone. There are a lot of gutsy things in this world, but I really do believe actors are a gutsy creature because they put their heart and soul out there every time. But it applies to, and that's where, even taking ownership of language, the more this language is inhabited, the more it becomes inevitable in your human animal, the freer you will play with it. So it's a tall drink of water as well, beer, whiskey. But but that's sort of the goal. So that's why when I say that people moving where they want to move on a stage is just the tip of the iceberg in many ways. I never insist that people do it differently every time. That's not the point. You can absolutely re-experience something, and there can be great minutia and nuance in how it is different from night to night. But make no mistake, it must be different. You must create the conditions every time for what can be genuine, active listening. It's not easy, but if the freedom is there and the trust is there, then you can get out there and. It should never necessarily come out of your mouth. You're informed. Your performance is largely informed by the beautiful actors you're playing across. Thank you. Oh, sure. Okay.
I'd like to ask Peter Gibeon, who's Associate Professor in our Department of English, to come up and give a formal thank you to Jonathan.
Well, I've been an ultra-regular, eager beaver, constant attender of these Shakespeare lectures for many, many years, and I guess I'm a professor in the English department here, so that makes some sense. But I also know that these lectures have become kind of landmark events, can't-miss events for many people across the McGill community and across Montreal, really, now, especially since the partnership was established with the Stratford Festival. So first, I wanted to thank Friends of the Library, really, for having set up this whole series in the first place. Please do keep the series going. A lot of us appreciate it. And I'd like to thank Stratford Theatre Festival from a distance for having made available, or maybe impressed into service a little bit, their leading theatre workers year after year, especially for the last 8 years. But of course, then the major thank you is to, on the part of all of us, I'll say, thank you to Jonathan, or Johnny Goad, for his generosity in agreeing to come and share with us these retrospective thoughts on the long arc of his development and his theater experiments for really a whole lifetime. What we've really experienced here, I think, is kind of a rich version of one of those making-of documentaries that we all see, you know, the making of Spam-A-Lot, the making of, which is next year, I gather, the making of Hamlet, the making of Henry V, or whatever. And, you know, we're not always, we don't always find those making of genres something purely attractive. I don't think, you know, we're not always certain we want to be taken behind the scenes to see how they make the sausage in government and politics, or we might get a little queasy when we're invited behind the scenes to see how they prepare the food at a supposedly gourmet restaurant, you know, and the same way we're not maybe always necessarily wanting to be in the room where it happens during every theatrical rehearsal. But in this case, I found it really wonderful to be taken behind the scenes in a very rich way through these sort of moments, flashes from a series of wild or, you know, very serious performances, bringing us into the play. And I thought it was really, you know, from the element of your title that you didn't really enunciate but came across anyway was, you know, bringing us into the play within the play and the imaginative play in the making of the play from your mother's teaching on up. That was really, really nice. And I think a lot of us were fascinated as you described in your own, again, your arc of your training, the way, you know, the joys and the challenges and the fun that you had, but your ability to play a range of roles. You know, from, you know, I saw you in a scary and mesmerizing Iago, I think, quite a while ago, at the same, very close to when you were playing Music Man, and now you're going to be doing Spam-A-Lot, or, you know, and also you seem very open to this range of modes, range of tones. You know, so we go from the rollerblading, you know, samba to the you know, very moving tennis ball speech, you know, from Henry V. So that was really wonderful. And there was one element that I thought probably left all of us with a bit of a mystery, you know, sort of wanting more, but it probably can't be explained. And that was that, how did you get to those very honed performances of these parts? You know, it's still a mystery. You know, you know, what was that Chekhovian image technique, or what was involved with internalizing the iambic pentameter? Because we didn't really see the stages along the way. We just saw these, you know, beautiful final. Sort of finalized performances. But anyway, so, you know, I just think was thinking that following the arc of, again, of your of your life in the theater, we were kind of tracing something that you described to the McGill Reporter as the joy and the inspiration that you found when you finally did get there to Stratford. And, sort of the way you were looking at your fellow company members is the way I think we were looking at you. Watching fellow company members, you said, wrestling bravely with extraordinary parts, having breakthroughs, falling on their face, rising again, finding joy in the midst of tragic materials, facing their fears. So really, I think, thank you again for bringing us in from the sidelines to sort of have a feel for the process of the preparation for participation in this kind of what you described as the ultimate team sport. Thank you very much. And I have, on behalf of the Friends of the Library, a small, it's actually a pretty large gift to come. And then I'd like to welcome up to the podium Colleen Cook, our Trenholm Dean of Libraries, for a few final remarks.
Hold on. Don't start. Or else we're going to get all this on the...
Okay, don't leave yet. This is the commercial from the library. Okay. I'm Colleen Cook, and I'm the Trenholm Dean of the University Library here, and I'm very fortunate enough to get the last word. I just have to say thank you again. I was enchanted with your talk. I truly was, and you should lecture more often. There's no doubt about that. And I'm also glad to know that there's someone else who kind of stumbled into their career, because I always dreaded that awful question during interviews. And so what brought you to librarianship, knowing that, was I going to be truthful or not? Anyway, so that's another story. But in any case, this has truly been a remarkable evening, I think. And I'm so glad that you made it through your daughters and onto a plane, and we've got needle and thread somewhere if you really need it. Okay, so I'm delighted to be here and to celebrate Shakespeare and everything it takes to bring his work to the stage. Something you may not know is that Shakespeare is the single most represented author of books held in McGill Library's Rare Books and Special Collections. His presence is felt in the main collection and across our 80 special collections, stretching from original folios to fine press illustrated editions to children's books, engraved portraits, costumes, and theater sets. And we should buy those 7-page, whatever illustrated versions of. There's got to be a rare book librarian here somewhere who will do that. Okay. Whether it be the comedies, the tragedies, the histories, or the sonnet, Shakespeare is highly present at every turn of the corner in the McGill Library stacks. Our colleagues in Rare Books and Special Collections have compiled the images rotating on the screen above me, highlighting the extensive and varied nature of our collection, which includes a second folio Shakespeare, 1632, and 2 copies of the fourth folio, 1685, sonnets, costume sketches, and even a gold medal made for McGill on the occasion of the William Shakespeare tercentenary, I knew I was going to have trouble with that word, of 1864. These materials in all of our rare collections are accessible through our Rare Books and Special Collections reading room, and I invite each of you to visit and see them up close and in person, and we would welcome having y'all come. We truly would. That would be really fun for us. As Anne mentioned earlier, McGill is moving forward with a bold vision. We are reimagining library services and spaces for 21st century library users and beyond, and part of that is bringing these kind of materials out to people. I mean, these are owned by the citizens of Quebec. The vision for Fiat, look, okay, yes. Okay. The vision for Fiat Looks includes spaces and services dedicated to the discovery of McGill's rich collection of rare and special materials, of which I just touched on a selection. More than 250,000 items in our collection are not held anywhere else in the world. Expanded facilities within the project, like a rare books reading room, atrium, visual arts gallery, and consultation spaces, will augment existing programming and serve as meeting spaces and laboratories, fostering further interaction between students, curators, scholars, and the community at large, making our collections, including our Shakespeare gems, more accessible to a greater number of people. Thanks again, really very much, for being here tonight, and to the Friends of the McGill Library for their ongoing support and captivating lecture series. Johnny, I guess, but not John, has given us food for thought on knowledge and creativity that I'm sure we will all be pondering in the days and weeks to come. Good night.